All right, as we continue on, there's some kind of a saying about keeping your eye on the prize. I just want you all to realize this is what we're building towards. So if I say this is what it'll look like eventually. All right, there's nothing in our shopping cart. There's no checking out doesn't make sense. But I can go into soccer. All right, I can say I want to add this corner flag. Notice it's $34.95. They didn't implement tax. It wouldn't be that hard to put that in there. But we can remove it if we want to, or we can check out now. All right, and it'll come up and it'll bring this stuff. And it'll actually, depending on how you set this up, and I'll show you that when we get to that point, it'll send us an email with our entire order on it. All right, so that's what we are, again, that's what we will be moving toward. All right. So we're on the bottom of page 160. The author says here, all MVC projects start with a domain model because everything in an MVC application revolves around this domain model. As this is an e-commerce app, it says the most obvious domain entity we need is a product. So we're going to create a new folder called entities. This would have normally been done for the work that we did under models. All right. So under our domain, hear that? Under the domain, so we can, for right now at least, what I can do is I can take this web UI and I can collapse it down. And under the domain, I'm going to right mouse click, choose add, choose new folder, right mouse click, add, new folder. What happened? There it is. And I want to call it entities, E-N-T-I-T-I-E-S. All right. This is the bottom of page 160 and the top of page 161 in your book. All right. I haven't saved in a while, so I'm just going to do a file, save all, and this Ninject comment stuff and the Ninject resolver, I'm just going to close those. I shouldn't need them at least for a while. All right. So the author says you're all ready with the definition of the product class. So what we want to do now is in our, I didn't change the name, but in our entities folder here, we are going to right mouse click, choose add, and choose class. In the new entities folder you just created, right mouse click, choose add, choose class. It asks for a name. The name that they give it is product, which gives you this. Okay. And you can manually do it, you can copy it, whatever. Doesn't really matter. But it's all we want to do is we want to add these 5 fields right there. So let me add them. I'll put them right there. And there they are if you want to do it like that. So once you create that, you don't have to remove anything that's here, but you want to add these 5 lines. Product ID will be our primary key. Name will be the name of the product. Description will be the product description. Price will be the product price. And category will be something we won't worry about for now. But the categories, if you remember when I just ran the completed version, it said chess, water sports, and soccer. Those are going to be the categories. So we could conceivably go in and add additional categories. Also, when you look up on the screen here, I've said this before, but I just, it's the kind of thing I want to make sure you hear it over and over again. Get used to using type decimal for monetary values. It's designed to give you a closer example or a closer result when you do calculations than type double does. right? So the author says, I am following the technique of defining my own domain model in a separate project, which means the class must be marked as public. And if we take a look, all right, right now we just have class product. See this? Put the word public in front of that. Space. So yours and mine just said class product. By making it public, it will be possible for us to go in there and grab it from other parts of the program, such as the web UI. All right. All right. Now, the author says, I need some way of getting product entities from a database. Just so you know this, when we first start this, we are going to hard code the products in. Did you all hear me? We will eventually get rid of that and totally use the database. And the products in the database will be filled from this database right here. That is symbolic of a database table right there. All right? So, but the author says we need some way of getting product entities from a database. It says, as explained in Chapter 3, the model includes the persistent logic. And again, these are just terms that have to make sense to you. When the author says persistence, that means that you want to be able to save it, turn the computer off, turn it back on again, and still have it there. What that means is either you're going to have to use external files or a database. All right, and we're using a database. So, but the author says, even within the model itself, I want to keep a degree of separation between the model entities and the storage and retrieval logic that we will use on it. The way he does this is he uses a pattern. And if you say, what's a pattern? It's a way of coding. Model view controller is an example of a coding pattern. All right? So it says, I will not worry about how I'm going to implement data persistence for now, but I will start the process of defining an interface for it. All right? So notice, what we want to do is in our sportstore.domain folder, we want to create another folder in there called abstract. And inside of there, we want to create a new class. All right? It's a new interface file, but it's a class that's called iProductRepository.cs. All right? What does that mean? Let's go through the steps. All right? So again, I'm just following the author's steps on page 161. So under the domain, which is up here, I am going to right mouse click, choose add, choose folder. Again, under the project name sportstore.domain, I right mouse clicked on the name of that project, chose add and new folder. There it is. We are told that we are supposed to call this abstract. And just so you know, we've talked about this before, but I'm starting to hopefully tie a few strings together here. And that is it mandatory when you call it abstract to make the class name capitalized, on that folder? No, but it's more convention. However you're going to do this, remember, there's at least a chance, whether you think so or not, there is at least a chance you might want to give a potential employer access to this repository. So more than anything else, you should be consistent with the way you do things. That's all I'm saying. All right. So in here, we want to right mouse click on abstract, choose add. All right. And I can either go to class or I can go to new item right here. I don't think it even says interface file, but I don't know. It says sort by default, name in ascending order. Oh, there is one that says interface. All right. So it does say that we're supposed to create a new interface. So it says right mouse click the abstract folder, select add new item, and select the interface option. All right. Again, if I did it too fast, we just created the abstract folder, right mouse click on it, choose add, choose new item, and I went back and I said put them in ascending order and went down and found interface. There it is. All right. Just so you know, again, I may have said this already. By default, interface files like this always start with the letter I. Typically, you don't want your own classes to start with the letter I because that's reserved, even though it's unofficial, for interfaces. All right, and we want this to be called according to what's in the book on page 162, I product repository. I, capital P, R-O-D-U-C-T, capital R-E-P-O-S-I-T-O-R-Y. I product repository. And click add. There's not a lot in there right now, but inside of here, right there, inside of the line that says interface, I'm looking to see what he's changed. All right, first thing, he has the word public here. Second, in between the two curly braces, it's I enumerable product oops, let's try it again. Products get. All right. So I'm getting an error. Let's see if we can figure out why we're getting the error. First thing here says you're probably missing this using statement. So I'm going to put that in. All right. So when I first typed this in, I made this public, and then I typed in this line. All right. After I typed in that line, all right, it gave me an error here. When I cursored over that and clicked the down arrow, it says you might want to have using sports store domain entities. I do. So I'm going to click that. It added another using statement to the top, and now my errors are gone. Yes. We started by creating that abstract folder. I take it that everybody was able to do that. Then we right mouse clicked on the abstract folder, chose add. All right, chose new item, and then either you can search for it or do what I did, which was name in ascending order. Go down until you find interface. Click there. The interface you are to create is called I product repository with a capital I, a capital P, and a capital R. All right, right there, I product repository. Click add once you've done that. I'm not going to because I already have mine. All right. When we did that, it came up and it looked like this. So I'm going to get rid of the public. I'm going to just get rid of everything so it looks the way it did when we started. That's what it should look like when you do it. All right. So the first thing we want to do is come in here and make the interface public. All right. The second thing we want to do is in between the curly braces, we want to put an I enumerable in here. of type product, and it will be called products, and it's got just a get. All right, we'll talk about the whole line in a minute, but there's an error here, so I'm clicking the down arrow and adding that using statement right here at the top. All right. Couple things about this. This will end up being a list of products. You already know what products are because we already looked at the product.cs file. All right. Notice though, all it says in there is get. If you remember in one of the earlier chapters, you were asked a question in one of the written tests, what are getters and setters? Getters allow you to grab values. Setters allow you to set values. Since this is get right here, it's read only. So this particular routine, this particular interface will be involved in grabbing existing information, not in setting information, because there's no set. All right. Questions? Hopefully everybody got that. Okay, go ahead. Yes, I did. Thank you. Yeah, make sure you capitalize that. Or pluralize it, I should say. So again, the changes we made here were to add public, to add this line right here, and to make that line work, we had to bring in that using statement that was right there. All right? Once we have done all of that, all right, so we followed these steps that were right here, and it says the interface uses the IEnumerable T, and all T stands for, just so you know, on the screen that means type. So what type of data are you dealing with? You can have an IEnumerable of any type. Normally, for an IEnumerable, it won't be an IEnumerable of ints or of doubles or whatever, all right? Because you use lists typically for them. An IEnumerable is typically used with objects, like product objects. All right. So it says here, a class, this is the important part of using the interface. A class that depends on iProduct repository can obtain product objects without knowing anything about where they're coming from, excuse me, how they're implemented, etc. All right? Now, and again, I'm using a lot of words, all right? But some of them you've heard, some of them you haven't. You've seen me give this example before. That I'm coming out here, I'm putting in a calculator. All right? I don't want it that big. So I'm going to put in here 367, and I'm going to hit the square root. You all know how that works. All right? What you see is the interface. What you don't see is the implementation. So when you are creating code, typically the only thing that you're making public are interfaces. You don't make your implementation code public. Why? Because you don't want other people to be able to dink around with that stuff and potentially screw it up. All right. So next, the author gets into on page 162, it says here, making a mock repository. Now that we've defined an abstract interface, it says, I could implement the persistence mechanism and hook it up to a database, but he doesn't. The idea with this mock is we're going to just throw some data in a temporary kind of holding place. So we're going to assume for a second we don't have a database. We don't know how to make a database. We just want to mock something up so we can see whether or not what we're working on right now works or doesn't work. All right? So the author says, I define the mock implementation and bind it to the iProduct repository interface in the add bindings method of the Ninject dependency resolver class. Yeah, that's all clear as mud. So the author is saying what we want to do is we want to go back into our web UI project, and we want to find the add bindings method of our ninject dependency resolver. It's really not that hard when you think about it. So I'm going to do another file, save all, and I'm going to close what I have open right now. All right? So the author says, again, what we want to do is we want to go into our sportsstore.webui. So I'm opening that. All right. Inside of there, amongst other things, I'm going to close a little bit of this. I have, under my infrastructure, I have this thing called Ninject Dependency Resolver. I'm going to open that. All right. And you'll notice, I'll show it to you on the screen here. We're going to have to add some using statements. See that? And we're going to have to add this. That's why I told you it's much easier if you have the PDF. I'll put all of it up there in just a second. So I'm going to start by, I'm just going to grab every using statement the author has here, every one, and I'm going to replace the using statements we have in there with that. All right, and if I did that too fast, in English, what I'm telling you is I just put in those using statements. All right, make that nice and big there. So go ahead and do that. Again, not hearing typing, I'm moving on. All right. So the author says next, what we want to do is in our code in this file, we want to find a method that's called add bindings. And notice right now there's nothing in there but a comment that says, hey, put your bindings here. This interface file, what we're doing right now is two things. We're creating an interface so that we're able to do things indirectly, and we're acting as though we have a database even though we don't have one. So I don't need that put bindings here comment anymore, but instead I'm going to grab the code here that is on page 163. And again, I'll put it in here. I will add it right there. Doesn't come out looking very nice, so I'm going to do that and that. All right. But just in case you couldn't read it or however, okay, so we're telling it to set up a brand new product repository, which we just created. All right, and we're saying that thing, it's called mock, is going to return a new list of products. What products? Well, this is the first time, even though they're not in a quote real database unquote, this actually is the first time that we're looking at products. We're saying that we're going to have 3 products: a football that's $25, a surfboard that's $179, and running shoes that are $29. And then we're telling it to take basically that repository that we just created and bind it to this, so that it's able to have, for lack of better words, kind of an unofficial communication between the two. All right? Now, let's say you're like, whatever you say, but I don't have a flaming clue as to what you're talking about. All right? If you look in the book, and I'll come right back to this, there's the author's explanation in here. Not a real long explanation, but just so you see it. All right? So if you'd rather look at the author's, cool. I'm not at all offended. Right? So the author says he had to add a number of namespaces, which was were those using statements. But the process we did was to create a mock implementation. Mock meaning not real. All right, so we are mocking a database, for lack of better words in here. And we are making sure that this database that we're putting in here can talk to that iProduct repository interface that we just created. And the author says we also have this line, which is right at the end, kernel.bind iProduct repository .toConstant mock.object. All right? And it says right here, I want Ninject to return the same mocked object whenever it gets a request for an implementation of the product repository interface, which is why this constant method was used. And again, you all can get this. If you, well, why did he do it that way? I didn't write the book. I think that the guy basically is supposing that most of the people who are going to go through this either have some exposure to ASP.NET, all right, however it may happen to be, all right, or want to see what he considers to be the right way of doing things, all right. So, next, displaying a list of products. Well, to display a list of products, what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to go in and we're going to have to add a controller. After we go in and add the controller, we're going to add a view. All right? After we go in and we add the controller, and after we go in and we add the view, and put a little bit of code in here, if you look up on the screen here, it's up a few pages, but I want to show you. That's what we're going to have. And you're like, wow, that's a lot of work to get that. And you're right, and it's ugly. There's no Bootstrap, there's no CSS, there's nothing. But the idea is now we pulled that information, we pulled it from our products table using the iProduct repository, all right, and this Ninject dependency resolver, which allowed those two to communicate with one another. So, as he says in this section, we're going to create a controller and add an action method that can display details of the products in the repository. For now, it's only that mock data. Later, we'll actually add a regular database to it, albeit a very simplistic one. So, guess what? You know how to do this. Right-click on the Controllers folder under Sports Store Web UI, choose Add, choose Controller. All right, so let's start with that. So I'm under Web UI. There's my controllers. I'm going to right mouse click, choose Add, and choose Controller. That shouldn't be a big stretch of the imagination to anybody. All right, we've done this several times now. When this comes up, now when we did the example in class the other day, we chose that. The author chooses to use empty for basically everything that he does. All right, so he says come in here and do that, choose empty, set the name to product controller, and click the add button. All right, so choose empty, click add. Now if you get that error, I did too, if you get that error, it says it cannot find the file specified. I'm hoping what we're going to do now is going to fix it. We'll find out. All right. But I'm going to do a file, save all, and then I'm going to do a project, in fact, a build solution. And if for some reason that doesn't fix it, well, then we're going to have to take another break so I can figure out why it doesn't work. All right. So I'm right mouse clicking on controllers, choosing add, choosing controller, choosing empty, clicking add. That's the way it's supposed to look, right? So it worked doing that. All right, and I've told you before, that was, hey, I'm sure the author probably said it here someplace, and I just overlooked it. When you have to build like that, for lack of better words, kind of look at it this way. When your program is like a race, and every single file in your program is running in the race, somehow your files that you created got ahead of the system files. And by building it, you're letting those system files catch up. Not the best of analogies, but it's kind of what's happening in the background. We are supposed to call this product singular controller. Product controller. All right, and click add. Then you should get something that looks similar to what you see in the book on page 164 or up on the screen. Now, I can go over all sorts of stuff, but you should now understand what that line means. Everybody should, because I went over it a few times. We talked about how all controllers have to inherit from the controller class. And that controller class is defined in here using system.web.mvc. That's why right now that file is blackened and not gray. All right. So what's in here right now is just this. And from what I'm looking at in here, at least for now, we're not using that. I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to leave it in there. But I'm going to go up. And again, if you look up on the screen here, it tells us it's supposed to look like this. We've got the namespace line in there already. We've got the public class, but we are to add this. All right. So it's kind of small. In fact, let me just go back and grab the whole thing. All right, so it's pretty ugly. Nothing went over. All right, so that's what you should have. The positioning of the curly braces isn't that important. My positioning is different than the positioning the author has. All right, but it really and truly does not matter. So again, looking in the text, the author says, in addition to removing the index method, so we will get rid of it, we added a constructor. What's a constructor? It is a file that's got the same name as the class. The name of the class is product controller, so the constructor is product controller. Constructors are methods. Did you hear me? Constructors are methods, but they're a special type of method that have two things special about them. Number one, they cannot return anything. Number two, they are automatically called when you instantiate or create an instance, in this case, of the product controller. All right, so I'm just going to grab that whole namespace thing I showed you, and I'm going to replace the namespace that's in there right now. This whole thing. All right. And, well, what do I have? Well, I've got errors. What does that mean? Probably I'm missing a using statement. So I'm going to click here, and there it is. using sports store domain abstract. All right, I put that in at the top, and it does at least look like it got rid of everything. So this is the routine that's going to be called whenever we create, all right, or whenever we instantiate products. Now, on the bottom of the page here, the author, again, that's the author's explanation. If you don't like mine, take a look at that. All right. Down below what we were just working at, we're going to add a new method. It's literally just about 2 or 3 lines long. So we're going to add this method down at the bottom. Public view result list return view repository.products. We have not yet written the associated view. That view is going to give us that ugly thing that I showed you that's just going to return the names of our different products rather, and their prices. So I'm going to grab this, copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to put it down at the bottom right underneath the constructor that we created. It's not mandatory that you put the constructor first like they showed here. It's convention. For lack of better words, it's what people do. And when next semester when we're doing Java, we'll do it the same way. All right. So the author mentions here at the top of the next page, calling the view method like this without specifying a view name tells the framework to render the default view for the action method. Passing a list of product objects to the view method provides the framework so that it can populate the model object in a strongly typed view. You know what a strongly typed view is now. It's one that at the top is going to have the model statement. All right, so we're going to do that now. It says add the layout, add the view start, and add the view files. We'll do this, we'll run it, which will bring us to the bottom of 168, and we'll take yet another break. So the author says, now I need to add a default view for the list action. Right-click on the list action method. You know how to do this already. All right, so in other words, come right here, right mouse, click on the word list, and choose Add View. It looks like this. Fill it up so it looks like this. Do not choose empty without model, choose empty. For the model class, it should give you product like that. And make sure the use a layout page is checked. I believe right now we do not have a view start file. We do not have an underscore layout file. We will create those. That's, again, one of the pitfalls, so to speak, of starting with an empty project, is there's more that you have to create yourself. Right, so let me catch back up. List, empty, product. We don't want to, this is not a big thing, just so you know. If you look right here, this reference script libraries, what that means is if it's checked, we'll have access basically to the JavaScript libraries that we're using. The author does not say to check that, so I'll uncheck it. All right. This to me looks like the one in the book looks. I'm going to click Add. Notice the add model statement at the top, again, meaning it's a strongly typed view. All right, we went over that last week. Now, the author says here, when you click the add button, it creates it all for you, but it also should create the view start and the shared layout. Let's look. There's views, there's view start, there's underscore layout. So they were created for us because we checked that option. All right. Says this is a helpful feature, but in keeping with a Microsoft approach to default content, the underscore layout contains a template that the author does not want or need. Says edit the layout so that it matches what's on the bottom of 165 and the top of 166. All right. So in other words, whoops, we don't need any of this. This is our new file, our layout file, and we're going to replace that layout file with what's shown here. Let me grab it and put it in there, and then I'll put it all up so you can take a look at it. So that's it, right there. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. And if you really want to make my day, somebody will try to answer it. All right? From what you see on the screen right here, I guess that's a little too big. From what you see on the screen, what is the line in here that makes everything happen? Because we talked about this last week. What? Yes, sir. Thank you. What happens is, when it gets to the render body, it puts in any code that it needs to make this work. The other stuff around it, you should all know what this is. That's making it responsive, right? It's saying it's using the Unicode character set, and it's making it responsive. But in here, it's telling it to bring in the code that it needs. All right, a couple more pages. We're going to take a break. All right, promise. But I want to grab this because that's the only place I've got it, and I want to put it in to here. All right. Okay. Although I set the model type of the view to be the product class, I actually want to work with an IEnumerable product. All right. And again, IEnumerable means that it can hold virtually anything. It's kind of a wild card, for lack of better words. All right. It says, which is what the product controller obtains from the repository and passes it. I have edited the @model expression. You may remember this, you may not, but please look up on the screen. All right. We're going to look at this list.cs HTML file in a second. But see that line? You see that's 2 lines. Yeah, it's originally 1 line. They make into 2. We went over an example like this last week. All right. If you keep it as 1 line, when you get inside of here, instead of being able to say P name, you're going to have to say like, I think it's sportstore.domain.entities.p name. So it's a shortcut. All right. So this is what we want in here for the list.cs HTML file. So there's product, there's the list file. Now there's not much in it, but the model line is 1 line long. We want to replace it with that. You don't have to put in the blanks like I am. Just to me, it makes it a little easier to read. That's all. All right. And again, there it is. Okay. The author says that they also changed the title of the page. It says, note that I did not use the razor @statement with a colon. You don't have to. Okay. See this? Anybody remember this from last week when I did an example like this? The author is saying that rather than sticking a $sign there, which is really pathetic programming, he's instead going to say, hey, that's a string anyway. Really, once we print it out, so let's just call the toString on it and format it so that it's currency. Again, the advantage there It'll always be 2 decimal places, and any necessary comments will be put in for us. All right, bottom of page 166 and going on to 167. The author says, I need to tell the MVC framework that it should send the requests that arrive, all right, from the application to the list method. Here's a question for you. Right now, don't look, listen. Right now, if we're using a controller, where does it go by default? What method? Somebody's got to know this. It's the index method. But we want to change it to tell it by going into register routes and making the change that's shown here. This had said home and index. We want to change it from home and index to product and list. Because that says, for lack of better words, it is saying run that by default. So in other words, if you look up on the screen here, all right, there's my app start, and inside of there is route config. So right now it shows us the default route. We don't even have a home. Well, we might have one. I don't think we do, though. Do we have a home controller? No. So that wouldn't work anyway. But we want it to call what? Our product controller. If we left it like that, it would call index. But our product controller does not have an index.cshtml method. It only has a list method. I like to take my things like this and break them up, because to me it makes it much easier for me to see what's going on. You may agree, you may not agree, and it really and truly doesn't matter a bit. I mean, you can get real anal about this stuff and line everything up like little soldiers if you want to. All right? So we've gone into our route config file. A good time to do a file save all. All right? Because there have been changes made to a lot of different files. All right. The author says there's the changes. Okay. It says note that I have set the value to product and not product controller. Yeah, you always do it like that. We already know that. Finally, it says now we should be able to run the application. All right. What does that mean? Well, we've already done the file save all. We should be able to hit our run button. And my hope is for me and for each one of you that when you hit the run button, it comes up, it's not an error, and it looks like what you see on page 168. So it looks like this. I'm going to show you the right one in case mine, it looks like mine did work. It looks like this. When I ran mine, it looked like that. Again, no styling, no bootstrap, no anything. The author says then, this is a typical kind of pattern that you'd use for the development of an ASP.NET MVC framework project. All right. I'm going to stop the run. He does mention on here, we've talked about it already, but I just do want you to hear it. Let's pretend for a minute, let's pretend that in this list.cshtml file, let's pretend I spelled product wrong. You all with me? So I went back and changed it. If you change a .cs file, that's not what this is. If you change a .cs file like a controller or like a model, you have to save it, stop any run you have going, and go and rerun the program. But if you change a .cs.html file, if you want to, you don't have to rerun the program. You can just reload the page by clicking the reload button. And that's what the author says there under where it says easier debugging. All right, I made it a little long, but just so you hear it. So it is 2:20. Let's come back. 2:30. All right. We're going to pick it up on preparing the database, starting at the bottom of page 168.